So I'm sorry, I don't have a guest speaker today, so I'm going to have to talk. All right, so we're beginning the second Chumash of the Torah. And it's interesting that Chazal give every Chumash a nickname, interesting nicknames to the Chumash. The book of Bereshis is called Sefer HaYashor, the book of the upright. Why is it called the Book of the Upright? Because it's the lives of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are called Yesharim. They are upright in their relationship to God and in their relationship to man. So that Sefer Bereshis is Sefer HaYashar. I'm going to skip Shmos for a minute. Vayikra is called Toras Kohanim, the laws of the priesthood, because Vayikra is about Korbanos of the temple, and all of the laws of Kohanim. They can't marry divorced women and the like. That's Vayikra. Bamidbar is called, this is the rabbinic nickname, Chumash HaPikudim, the Chumash of counting. Actually, numbers, there's a perfect translation. Because Bamidbar gives us two different countings, two different censi, I believe is the plural. One is a census of the Jews who left Egypt, and the other is a census 40 years later of the Jews who will be entering the land of Israel. The book of Devarim has the nickname Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah, which, by the way, is actually the translation of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is Greek, and it actually means the second law, Deuteronomy. And it's based on the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu, before his death, repeated a lot of the Torah. Now, there's a lot of new things, but it's still called Mishneh Torah. It's a repetition of many things. So everything has a nickname. Sefer HaYashar, Toras Kohanim, Chumash HaPikudim, Mishneh Torah. What is the nickname of Shmos, which of course is the Chumash that we're going to be starting? So Ramban does give it a nickname. Ramban calls Shmos Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption, which makes a lot of sense. Redemption, Yeshivat Mitzrayim. But the Netziv brings from in the name of the Gaonim, I think it's the Bahag, that the nickname that Sefer Shmos had was Chumash Hasheni, the second Chumash, which is not much of a nickname, really. Okay, in other words, Bereshis has a name, and Vayikra has a name, and Bamidbar has a name, and Devarim has a name, and the only name Shmos has is, oh, it's the second book. Okay, I know it's the second book, but why don't you give it a name? So the Netziv explains very beautifully that the meaning of Shmos being the second Chumash doesn't just mean it's the second Chumash. It means it's part 2 of Bereshis. So the way Chumash Hasheni means Bereshis part 2. How is that so? Because the book of Bereshis describes the creation of the world. Now Rashi says, the second Rashi in the whole Torah, says Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning God created, but we say Bereshis because of two things that are called beginnings did God create the world. God created the world because of the Jewish people, who are called the beginning, and God created the world because of the Torah. So it turns out that Bereshis tells us that God created the world. Shmos tells us why God created the world. Because what happened in Shmos is the Jewish people became liberated from Egypt, and they became a nation, and they accepted the Torah. So it's called Chumash Hasheni, not stam because it's the second Chumash. That's an obvious point. Rather, it is an appendix. It is a supplement to Bereshis, because Bereshis is the book of creation, and Shmos is the reason for creation. Klal Yisrael and accepting of the Torah. Now, in the book of Shmos, there are three major themes. Three things happen in Shmos, although there are a lot of side tracks too. Theme number 1 is Yetzias Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, the slavery and the redemption. Theme number 2 is accepting the Torah. And theme number 3 is building a mishkin, right? If you had to kind of give me one sentence about what are the 3 main ideas in the book of Exodus, the book of Shmos, Yetzias Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, Hakamas HaMishkan, and with a few sidetracks like the sin of the golden calf and the like. It's kind of getting off track a little bit. Now, what's interesting is, I think the Sfas Emes says that these three stages are not just things the Jewish people went through, but they are stages in our own spiritual life, in our own spiritual growth. Let's first look at the idea of Mitzrayim. This is a beautiful, powerful thought from the Baal HaTanya, from the Alter Rebbe, where he says like this: the word Mitzrayim has a double meaning. Mitzrayim, of course, means Egypt, and we believe that the Jews were slaves in the land of Egypt, and God took us out of that slavery by the 10 plagues and by the splitting of the Red Sea, meaning Yetziat Mitzrayim is not just a metaphor, it's not just an allegory, it is a historical event that happened. Now, granted, I'm not going to really talk about this. People raise questions. How come there's no archaeological evidence of the Jews being in Egypt? Such an event should somehow leave a trace, as it were. On the other hand, some people say there is archaeological evidence. It's interesting that Jews have not been in the forefront of this. The people who have been in the forefront of trying to unearth archaeological evidence are actually fundamentalist Christians who are trying to look around. But be it as it may, I think Rabbi Gottlieb has some lectures on archaeology and Judaism, and you can even Google archaeological evidence for the Exodus or for the slavery in Egypt, and you can find something. So I'm not here to address that issue now, but the point is very, very clear that we do believe it happened. We're not just going to say it's a mashal for something. But, the Baal HaTanya says, in addition to the literal meaning of Mitzrayim as Egypt, Mitzrayim also means constriction, limitation, blockage, inhibition. David HaMelech in Tehillim, in part of that we say Hallel on the holidays and the like, calls out to Hashem in desperation and says, Min ha-meitzar karasika. Min ha-meitzar, from the narrow, confining, meitzar and Mitzrayim, a very similar word. Min ha-meitzar karasika, from the narrow, confining place of desperation, I call out to God. Based on that, the Baal HaTanya says, every person has their own Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim of their soul. A person may have a Mitzrayim, anything that blocks you from connecting to Hashem. So you could have the Mitzrayim of laziness, or anger, or egotism, selfishness, or the Mitzrayim of taiva, or the Mitzrayim of self-loathing and depression and hopelessness. These are your own Mitzrayims. These are your own slaveries. They are a slavery that exists within us, not outside of us. And there's been an old saying that it's easier to take the Jew out of Mitzrayim than it is to take Mitzrayim out of the Jew. So here's the Baal HaTanya's chap, his beautiful insight. When God took the Jews out of Mitzrayim, he put into the Bria a power that enables each and every one of us to become liberated from that which enslaves us. So this is an interesting point in biblical understanding generally, because people often pose a binary question. Is the Torah history, or is the Torah metaphor, spiritual archetype? Meaning you'll see in modern scholarship, sometimes even in left-wing orthodoxy, very left-wing orthodoxy, the Torah is not meant to be an actual story. There wasn't an Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. There wasn't Yetzias Mitzrayim. But these are spiritual ideas. So some people say, no, the Torah is history. Other people say, no, the Torah is not meant to be history. The Torah represents spiritual concepts. But what I would say to that is, that's a false binary choice. That's a false either or alternative. If you ask me, is the Torah history or is the Torah spiritual metaphor? My answer is yes. Meaning to say it's both. It is history, but the history itself represents spiritual ideas. And that's what the Baal HaTanya is saying. Yetzias Mitzrayim as history meant God took the Jewish people out of Egypt. 100%. It happens. But spiritually, it represents the idea that Hashem put into the Bria a power to be liberated from all of the inner Mitzrayims that constrain us, that constrict us. And that is why we have to mention the Exodus every single day, because we go through the Exodus, or potentially we can go through the Exodus every single day. We try to be liberated from our Mitzrayims. Yetzias Mitzrayim isn't just something that happens, it's something that potentially can happen every single time. Again, I mean, addictions would be an obvious example. The ability to break off an addiction or take steps towards breaking it off. But the truth is, whether you call something an addiction or not, I mean, those are labels. But bad midos, as they say, anger, selfishness, all of these different issues are Mitzrayims. They block us. So, Torah is about, in part at least, achieving freedom. So now, let's look at the three themes of the book of Shmos in light of this idea. We have theme number 1, be freed of your limitations. Be freed of the inner Mitzrayim that enslaves you, that inhibits you, that blocks you. And that's what it means to be free. But freedom is ultimately not enough. People sometimes say, the purpose of my life is to be free. But that makes no sense. Freedom is not a purpose. Freedom at most may be a condition. For me to be able to do what's worthwhile in my life, I need to have a certain amount of freedom. So freedom is a condition, freedom is a predicate, freedom is a necessary thing, but freedom does not give you the content of what your life is. There was a famous psychologist who was the Talmud Muvak of Sigmund Freud, even a more famous psychiatrist, Erich Fromm. And Erich Fromm was Jewish, although not observant in any way. Sigmund Freud was also Jewish, not observant, although Freud actually had a background of rabbis in his yichus and the like. And Erich Fromm once remarked, we make a very big mistake when we describe freedom as freedom from something, because that just gets you out of a negative. True freedom has to be understood as freedom towards something. Your freedom has to be towards something. It can't just be get out of the things that are enslaving you. So that's why right after right after Yetzias Mitzrayim, we have to move towards Matan Torah. Take your freedom and submit yourself to the will of God. That is why, if you think about the Jewish calendar for a moment, you will see that Pesach is the holiday of freedom, and Shavuos is the holiday of Torah. But we actually connect the holiday of freedom with the holiday of Torah by the mitzvah of counting the Omer. Right? On Pesach itself, we start counting to the next holiday. Why? Because freedom without Torah is just destructive. Not only is it meaningless, it's actually destructive. Your freedom has to liberate you to connect to something higher, to something better. Otherwise, you're aimless. Otherwise, there's no purpose in anything that you're doing. There was an Indian poet Tagore, I don't mean a Native American, I mean the Indian Asian. And Tagore was a very famous guy. I don't know if he knew any Jews, but I think he won the Nobel Prize for Literature all the way back in the 1920s. And Tagore gave a beautiful, beautiful metaphor. He said a human soul is like a violin string. A violin string is capable of producing beautiful music. There's beautiful music in that string. But imagine if you have a loose violin string that's simply on the table. A string. I take a string. Let's imagine this pen is a string. What sound can I get by flicking my finger over a loose string? I'll get no sound at all. How do I get a sound out of a violin string? I take the string and I tie it taut on the instrument. Then I get music. So Tagore said, this is sometimes the paradox. We think, oh, if I would be free, I would be creative, my soul would sing, the beauty of my soul would come out. But you encumber me with commandments, with obligations. I'm not able to express myself in any way. Tagore says the paradox of life, which may not be intuitive, is only when you tie yourself down and submit to something higher will the music of your soul be able to come out. And if you're totally not connected to that something higher, you're like a loose string on a kitchen table in which no music will be able to be heard. The paradox that freedom requires submission. Freedom requires giving yourself over to a higher ideal. Now, the truth of the matter is, I can even demonstrate this, I think, by reference to secular pursuits. Music, art. Let's take an example. Let's imagine that you enjoy jazz. And I'm very, very, very far from an expert, but I know a few terms. So let's assume you enjoy the riffs of an improvisational jazz player. He's doing all these crazy things, really, really imaginative, exciting. And you decide that you want to learn how to play a trombone or a trumpet or some jazz instrument. And you get yourself a teacher, and the teacher says, okay, for the first week, you're going to be playing scales for 2 hours a day. And you say, scales? Boring. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. I want to create. I want to improvise. I want to do riffs. What are you telling me to do scales? But the short answer is, your ability to be creative requires that you connect yourself to a fundamental structure. And you have the discipline of learning the craft. And then you can fly and do all sorts of things. But if you try to do all the creative stuff without mastering basic, then you're like a 3-year-old who simply picks up a horn and starts blowing around and make all sorts of noise. Same thing with painting. People sometimes, sometimes you look at abstract art and, it looks kind of like, you kicked the can of paint over the canvas and then you walked over it and somehow you got to, sell it for $3 million. And that would be great. But if you look at an artist like Picasso, who of course was a great abstract artist, but if you look at when he was a child, how he was so careful to draw everything exactly right. So in Ruchnius, it's the same thing. Ultimately, God wants us to function as creative human beings. People who are unique, people who are special, not to be a carbon copy of each other. That we need to have individuality because our neshamos are unique. But in order to be free, we first have to submit to God's law. When we submit to God's law, we now have the freedom within those parameters to find our own way and to discover our own approach to things. But without being connected, you don't have that creativity that will take you anywhere. So that's why in the book of Shmos, after Yeshivat Mitzrayim, which is about leaving your limitations, We have Matan Torah, which is about submission to something higher than you. Now, but even that is not the ultimate goal. Because we have Matan Torah, accepting God's law, but then we have the third step, building a tabernacle, building a mishkan, building a dwelling place. Now it's Yadua that we have the famous pasuk. When the idea of mishkan is introduced, it says, V'yasu li mikdash, God says, make for me a sanctuary, V'shachanti bisocham, so I will dwell in them. Very, very famous drush, I'm sure you've heard it before. It does not say, make for me a sanctuary, so I will dwell in it. It doesn't say, I will dwell in it. Make for me a sanctuary, Hashem is talking to Moshe, so I will dwell in them. Who's the them? Bnei Yisrael. That the God's presence will dwell in their heart and in their soul. So the real sanctuary of Hashem is not in a building. The real sanctuary of Hashem is in my heart and in my soul. The famous words of the Sefer Charedim that have been put to music, and also it's a title of some very, very fine Svarim, Bilvavi Mishkan Evnech. In my heart, I will construct a dwelling place for God. My heart will be the place where God's presence rests. What does that mean? It's hard to define it a little bit. No, it's one thing. Matan Torah I can define objectively. Oh, I accept the Torah, so I'm going to wear tefillin, I'm going to daven, I'm going to read Shema, I'm going to keep Shabbos, I'm going to keep kosher, I'm going to try to avoid Lashon Hara. Those are objective things. But then you're telling me, but in addition to all that, the ultimate goal is to make a dwelling place for God in my heart. Well, what does that objectively mean, right? That doesn't have the same objective meaning as I'll put on tzitzis and tefillin and daven shachris and keep kosher. But that's supposed to lead to something else. All of those things are supposed to lead to stage 3. By stage 1, Yetziat Mitzrayim, leave your limitations. Stage 2 is accept God's commandments. But then there's a stage 3 that's more amorphous. Stage 3, make yourself a mishkan, a dwelling place for Hashem. This is indeed less of a clear idea, but the basic notion is that your mind and your heart should feel both Yiras Hashem, fear of God, which I'll define in a moment, and Avas Hashem. This refers not so much to your external actions, but to the inner states of being, of Yiras Hashem and Avas Hashem. So let's talk about it just for a few moments. Yiras Hashem is translated in English as fear of God. What does it mean to fear God? Am I scared of God? Am I frightened by God? So here's the very critical point. The Rishonim already identified there are 2 types of fear of God. There is what you might call lower fear, and there is what is called higher fear. I mean, the word English doesn't really do that helpful, but we'll go with the English just because that's how we translate it. Lower fear is quite logical, fear of punishment. Meaning, we know that after 120 years, we will have to give a spiritual accounting for all of the mistakes that we made. And there may be Gehenna, there may be various punishments we'll have to undergo. So, because of that fear of punishment, I try to be in my best behavior. Now, that is not the highest level of serving God. That's a low level of serving God. I'm serving God because I don't want to get in trouble. Okay. But it gets the job done, whatever works. Meaning to say, if that is a motivator, okay, then let that be my motivator. better to be motivated to behave correctly, even by fear of punishment, than not to have any motivation at all. So there is such a thing, and the truth of the matter is, we may disparage it and say, oh, that's not a noble goal, but halvai v'halvai that we would have that, because then we would never sin. But Yiras Hashem really is something higher, and that's the higher level of Yira, and that is not that I'm scared of God, but that I have awe and reverence for His greatness and His perfection. See, these are two very, very different meanings of the term fear of God. One is, I'm scared He's going to hit me. The other is, I am overwhelmed by awe and reverence when I contemplate His perfection. Now, even in human relationships, we have that. Let's imagine, I keep on thinking about Queen Elizabeth, although she's not around anymore, but the Queen Elizabeth walks into the room. Now, you're not afraid she's going to cut off your head if you don't bow down or whatever it is. Now, maybe Henry VIII, her great-great-great-great-grandfather, maybe that would happen. But that's not going to happen with Queen Elizabeth, and it's not going to happen even with King Charles III or whatever. He's not going to cut off your head even in London. But still, the Queen or the King walks in, you have a certain respect for the position. You'll brush off your jacket, or stand up, etc. Same with the President of the United States, right? You meet the President. Now, the President might be somebody you don't even particularly care about or respect as a person, but there's a certain grandeur of the office. President of Israel, I'm not even sure there's the grandeur of the office. We're more of an informal country here. But you understand the notion of awe and reverence. Not fear, but awe and reverence. So the higher Yiras Hashem is not fear of punishment. The higher Yiras Hashem is awe and reverence. Now, those are Yira. But then you go to Ava, love of God. What does it mean to love God? When you love God, you want to be close to God. Now, obviously, close is referring to a relationship. It doesn't refer to physical proximity. God is everywhere anyway. But I want to be close to God. What makes a person love God? So here I want just as there are two types of Yira, there's actually two types of Ava, right? Two types of Yira, fear of punishment, and awe and reverence for God's perfection and power. Two types of love. And both are good. Both loves of God are good. One might be called an egocentric type of love, which, again, this is not meant to be negative. The egocentric love of God is, I love God because I'm grateful and appreciate all that He's given me. That's a beautiful thing. I don't mean to say it's bad in any way at all. It's a beautiful thing. But I call it egocentric love because it is based on what God has done for me. God has given me life. God has given me intelligence. God has given me the ability to feel and the ability to think and the ability to work. I'm so grateful for what God has given me. I love Him. So we'll call that egocentric love. Again, please do not take that as a negative. That is not a negative. Gratitude for life is a very, very beautiful quality. But it's still egocentric because you're connecting it to what God has done for you. Or even for the world. God created such a beautiful world. But there's another type of love of God, which is not connected to what God has done for you, but it's a love that comes from the contemplation of perfection. Like, let's imagine you look at the Grand Canyon, and you can actually feel a sense of love towards the magnificence of what it is that you see. Now, what does that mean? You love the rocks? You love the Colorado River? No, not really. But when a soul sees perfection, there is a love. So one aspect of loving God, according to Maimonides, is not so much the egocentric gratitude for what God has done for me, but the reverence and awe that I feel. Seen in this way, what I'm getting at is
that people often think fear of God and love of God are opposite emotions. In reality, they feed into each other. Because the greater my awe and reverence for the perfection of God, that turns into a love. Notice, the love comes from the awe. It may be true to be frightened of God and love God might be contradictory. There's the fear of punishment. But the awe and reverence, which is the higher level of fear of God, and the love that comes from an awareness of that perfection are very complementary, and they actually feed into each other in that way. So when we talk about the third stage, right, leaving your limitations is number one. Number two, submitting to the will of God, Matan Torah. Number three, building a dwelling place for God in your heart. We are primarily talking about Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And the Zohar has a beautiful description of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. It describes them as the two wings, the pair of wings that bring your mitzvos up to heaven. I do mitzvos, but what brings my mitzvos truly to Hashem is the Avas Hashem and the Yiras Hashem. They are the wings that cause my mitzvos to fly. What did they say? They tell a story about the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov once went to a shul, and the shul was half empty, but the Baal Shem Tov says, this shul is so crowded, I can't even find a place to daven. They said, why is it so crowded? Nobody's here. He says, well, what happens is, all your prayers are blocking. They're remaining on the floor. They're not going up to heaven. They're staying here, so I can't move, because when the prayers are offered without Avas Hashem, without Yiras Hashem, they remain on the ground. They don't fly up, as it were. Right. So these are the three stages: Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. So in this connection, let me just point out, and you may have been learning about this with other teachers or even read it on your own, that all of these weeks, the next 6-7 weeks, are called Shovavim. Shovavim. Now, Shovavim is an abbreviation. Take the first letter of the Parshios that are coming up for the coming weeks. Shmos is Shin. The Vav is Fo'era. Beis is Bo. Beshalach is the second base. Yisro. Mishpatim. So the first letter of those Parshios spell Shovavim, and they encompass Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. And some add the next two Parshios, Tat, Truma, Tetzaveh, which is building the Mishkan. So some call it Shovavim, and some extend it a little bit, Shovavim Tat. Now, in the United States, even among the Orthodox community, these weeks tend not to be noticed that much. There's no particular thing anyone does during that period of time, just a regular time without a Yom Tov. In Eretz Yisrael, people are a little more conscious of this period of time, and it is said that these are weeks. Well, first of all, there's a pun here, but I have to tell you the pun. The word Shovavim actually means wayward, off the derech. Like when a child is wild and misbehaved, he's called Shovav. Right? So Shovavim are, these Parshios are to help us come from off the path to be on the path again. Right? We are Shovavim, but we can come back. And it is said that the primary theme of these weeks is try to achieve certain levels of inner spiritual purity and to grow in Avat Hashem and Yirat Hashem. There is a special connection to matters of sexuality and temptation that could lead a person in a bad way. So, for example, among married couples, there will be lectures or shiurim in the laws of Nida, family purity, as well as shalom bayis, a marital harmony. For single people, there may be lectures for women about tznius and dress, and for men about avoiding pornography or looking at places or people that you shouldn't be looking at. But, right, so that's kind of many people have that focus during these particular weeks, Shovavim. But the overall idea is this. I mentioned from the Balatanya the notion that Yeshivat Mitzrayim is an opportunity that's available every single day to be liberated from my enslavers. But although that koach and that light is available every day, around Pesach time it's stronger because that's the actual time of the Exodus. So Pesach time, it comes with great intensity, but to a lesser degree, during the parshios in which we read about the Exodus, the light of Pesach also comes in. Greater than the rest of the year, but a little weaker than Pesach. So, in a sense, although we can eat bread, we can have chametz, but in a sense, we can experience the glow of Pesach during these particular weeks, which in turn can liberate us from all that enslaves us. And that's why these weeks were set aside for purity and for introspection and for spiritual growth. Right? So there's a lot that we can learn from Yetziat Mitzrayim. And the great idea is that a slave can be liberated from his slavery, but only if you want to be liberated. If you don't want to be liberated, then nothing's going to happen. And this is what Chazal say, Ein davar omed lifnei haratzon. There is nothing that can stand in place of a person's will. You desire something, Hashem will give you the opportunity. Now again, I do want to point out that I am not endorsing what's called manifestation. I don't remember what it's called. The whole thing about, no, you want a car. What do they call it? Yeah. I'm not going there. I'm not going with the idea that as long as you want a car, the secret, you'll get the car. No, maybe God will not give you a car, whatever the reason. But I am referring to spiritual closeness with Hashem. That's the one thing that if you really want it, you will get it. Maybe it won't be a car, and maybe it won't be the job, and maybe it won't be the grad school position. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has cheshbonos that we don't always understand. Whatever He gives us is best for us, but it may not be what we want at the time. Forgive me for quoting Mick Jagger. Not really a proper source, but you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need, and that's actually a very profound, I don't know, I doubt that he intended it that way, but that is a profound statement of emunah, in the sense that emunah does not mean God will give me what I want. Maybe God will not give me what I want because He knows better. But God will give me what I need. Okay? So the manifestation thing, the secret thing, you'll get the Cadillac, lav dafka. But the notion that if you want a relationship with Hashem, you will get it? Yeah, that's true. If you want it, He's there. And b'yesras Hashem, in these weeks, we should think about that relationship. And b'yesras Hashem, may we be zocha to make ourselves a mishkan, a dwelling place for Hashem's Shekhinah. So, have a good Shabbos.